Hi, everybody. Welcome into another edition. This is Cross Functionality, the show where coaching intersects baseball and softball, male and female, hosted by former college baseball and softball players. My name is Jim. James Anthony, as my mother calls me. And let me bring in former national champion at the University of Alabama in the great sport of softball. I'm not sure if you're ever a former national champion, which, by the way, we're talking about that today, and renowned current day coach Cassie Reilly-Boccia, my podcast co-host, friend, and partner. Hello, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you. Yeah, I don't know if I think we're a national champion for life. We just won it in the past.
Okay.
maybe we'll put it that way.
Perfect.
At least that's how I like to think of it.
I don't think you ever lose being a champion. I mean, listen, I listen to the Nationals radio broadcasts, the worst team in all of baseball still, and they're open. They still have the 2019 World Series champions. So you're never really not a champion.
It's not
anymore.
a home run record. It's not anything that can get broken or erased. It's there that year. Yeah.
Exactly. Do you can now here's the real test of our podcast. Do you consider Barry Bonds or Hank Aaron the home run champion?
My nostalgic, loving the game self wants to say Hank Aaron, but if I take baseball from a very non-emotional standpoint, it has to be Barry Bonds through and through.
Okay, now two guys, you being a swing professional that you are, who had completely different type swings. Am I right? Two different body types, two different statures, and they both hit over 700 home runs. Pretty incredible.
I think what makes Barry Bonds is so impressive, and I think people didn't realize it. Certainly, I probably didn't until the home run derby at his home field in San Francisco.
Yeah.
And how hard of a time people were having getting the ball out of the park.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you're like, wait a second, he plays here how majority percent of the time. I love looking at swings. I love looking at hand path. I love looking at what they did. And I don't know. I know it's different, but I feel like they both kind of got hands down a little bit. They both got into this little wrist abducted position that probably served them well with some whip. But like I said, my emotional side really loves old school baseball, but my analytical side loves news, everything that comes after it.
Well, we're going to talk about your experience at Dunkin' Donuts Park in Hartford, Connecticut here in just a second. But since we're on the hitting topic, I have to ask you, I've talked to a former big league player about this, and this was something that was rehashed on social media recently. I found it this week. Hitting at 100%, okay, in practice, when you're hitting at 100%, swinging as hard as you can, you being a coach yourself, do you believe that is good for the nervous system to be practicing at 100%, or do you build up to that and get to that certain point, or do you not hit and swing 100% of the time at all?
This is such a good question. And I can put my strength and conditioning hat on and talk about training and how there really are appropriate times to try to oscillate lower intensity and higher intensity days. And then I can put my former athlete hitting cap on and say, well, I was never successful when I was going 100%. And I felt like my wheels would start to come off almost like a car that didn't have appropriate brakes. But in the same breath, if I were to take a very honest view of what I think a hitter should be doing, it is as a coach, you're trying to elicit appropriate intent out of the hitter, right? What is the appropriate intensity for them to be successful at the plate? So there may be times where a hitter needs to feel like they're going 100%. They're healthy enough to. So I've already mentioned I was not healthy enough to probably be swinging 100%. I probably didn't have the brakes developed in my back to manage a swing like that. But if you're healthy enough to, there are appropriate times in training to try to max out, if you will. Does it need to happen every single time? No, because then you will start to break down either the nervous system, you'll start to compensate, right? So you'll start to feel like, well, hey, this isn't going as smoothly as I want, and you'll start to see compensations. But similar to when there's appropriate times to max out on your squat, to max out on your sprints, there are times to max out on your swing. Now, I do like to ask players what they feel like they operate best in a game at, because it is appropriate, I think, to build up. Let's say they like to operate at 80%. Let's build up to maybe some 90% swings, and then we dial it back and find out where that 85% is that you can operate best at.
You know, I'm glad you brought up the strength and conditioning part of things. For me, as crazy as I am, I like to plan my workouts and what programs I'll be doing a year in advance. And a lot of
Mm.
people look at me cross-eyed and crazy when I say that, but I'm proud to say that I do indeed do that. And there's a reason for it. It's because I don't want my central nervous system, my CNS, as it were, to
Mm.
be completely fried by the end of the year. I want to be able to go hard for, say, 12 weeks, 10 to 12 weeks, and then take a 2-week period where I deload, if you will, not go under the barbell or, I guess, yeah, under the barbell, squat or
Mhm.
bench press. I don't want to touch the barbell, don't want to touch the trap bar. I want to just use straight dumbbells because I'm giving my central nervous system a break. And I wonder how much that applies to hitting, where you're going 100%, but your central nervous system needs that break to be able to process. And I'm not, I'm again, I'm this is opinion based. This is not
Mhm.
scientific based on when it comes to the hitting side. I'm just kind of shooting here at the hip. I'm wondering though if that central nervous system needs time to recover because it's just not able to go 100% of the time, all the time, and then be at tip top shape when you are actually playing in the game.
So this is going to be what the major difference is how skill based of a movement it is versus and it's not a very load bearing. You do your bench pressure squat. Yes, there is some skill involved in understanding how to brace yourself, how to go through the movement. But when you go through hitting, it is not, you're not swinging this heavy club. You don't have weight on top of you. So the way it taxes our central nervous system is very, very different. So it allows us more freedom to say, okay, well, we could probably take 100 swings, but maybe 20 of them are at that max effort instead of 75 of them. And the other thing too is, this is just a coach knowing an athlete or an athlete knowing themselves. There are more things that tax your central nervous system than just what you do physically. Your lack of sleep, certain supplements, things that you eat, like, your hormones, like there are a lot of factors that go into whether or not you're going to feel taxed or not. And like I said, there may be days where you show up and you're like, you know what? I cannot rotate effectively today. Today is not my day to go 100%. Today is my day to maybe work on top hand or bottom hand, or maybe I need to do a little bit more warm up stuff. But that it is, you can put it in the same conversation, but it is not in the same category when it comes to how it taxes our nervous system.
So you're okay, just so everybody's clear, with swinging 100 at 100% of the time and getting the most out of that, almost in a way to wake up that central nervous system when you're training as well.
With certain athletes and certain times, it will be appropriate. It doesn't
Mhm.
need to be all the time, but yeah, I think it's wrong to say that there should never be a case. It's almost like, hey, should we ever throw 100%? Yeah, there's probably going to be times where we want to, like, that's going to be appropriate for the programming, again, based on the athlete, knowing the athlete, and going from there. There's going to be times where it's appropriate to get a lighter implement in your hand so you can swing almost underload your swing and swing even harder to then dial back. But again, it depends on how that athlete is being progressed and where that athlete is currently at.
And it depends on if that where that athlete is in their progression.
100%.
Because I'm wondering too, if you do swing at a certain percentage, let's say you swing at 100% of the time for 15 to 20 minutes, does that take away from the quality versus the quantity type issue that we may have and run into as hitters when trying to train and trying to do it the right way?
For sure. And listen, I do think there's going to be some hitters that have it ingrained in their head that they have to make contact all the time, and they're going to be very uncomfortable actually getting to 100%, because when you are at 100%, your accuracy is going to decrease. And again, you set up appropriate times in training for that to be acceptable, because you're redefined, like, it's a different definition of success. A success in 100% swing is not if you've hit the ball square on the nose. Maybe a success is, okay, did I get my system to, like, move a little faster, rotate a little harder? Yes, no, cool. My body, I basically applied a stimulus to my body. My body has now adapted to that stimulus. Now maybe your 80, 85% is actually at a higher miles per hour than before. That is what is improving. That's the case where you can say, okay, I'm not swinging at my highest intensity, so I'm very accurate right now. However, that is at a much higher miles per hour, let's say, than what it was before, or rotational acceleration than it was before.
So I wonder, and this leads me to my next question about pregame, because I see videos all the time. I've seen it up close right there in front of me. Guys and even gals on the softball side, they don't swing all that hard. They're just getting a feel for their swings pregame.
Mm-hmm.
What do you suggest? What percentage for any player out there, baseball or softball, do they swing at prior to going into that game?
Yeah, this is one of those like real versus feel things, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
What's the actual percentage and what are they actually feeling like?
Mhm.
And I hate saying it depends based on the hitter because it is so much easier to just put a blanket over and just be like, we should warm up at 50%, progress to 75, and operate at 85, right? Like,
Yeah.
but I have some hitters that itch to feel that max effort swing, and then I have some hitters again who operate way better going through some slow motion closed-eyed swings to start like that, and they're phenomenal hitters, but that's where they want to start. They want to start with a feel. So and it's unfortunate because this is where I was hoping blasts and diamond kinetics and those type of devices would go, where they would not just measure plain output, but you would create a profile that was like, okay, this is your most optimal swing. Your most optimal swing has this, this, and this. And so when you're warming up pre-game, the buzzer kind of goes off when you start to swing too hard or too slow. And it's like, okay, no, we need to get you back in this range, because you can remember how your body felt on the first game of a weekend versus the last game of a weekend.
Mhm.
Your body feels very different, in the intensity in which you swing to get to your most optimal swing might feel different then. You might need a different warm-up when you've just come off of a doubleheader versus when you're fresh and haven't played in a few days. So I do hope their technology does venture in that direction, even though I'm sure that doesn't probably sell as many products as like max, bat speed and all that might sell.
I just wonder what the intensity is like pregame
Yeah.
for, say, a Francisco Lindor compared to a Daniel Vogelbach. Two different body types,
Mm-hmm.
two different type athletes. Vogelbach maybe is going more closer, leaning towards going 100% warming up, where Lindor is probably just feeling it out and trying to barrel up baseballs off the tee or even front toss.
And I do wonder. I wonder if does your muscle dominance matter? Someone who's very type 2 versus a little bit more of a type 1 dominant muscle, are they gonna, or someone who's a fascial hitter, meaning like a tall, skinny hitter that's really relying on a lot of whip? Are they going to have to feel a very different warm up in order to feel like their swing is ready? Or is it the type of learner they are? Is someone who's a kinesthetic learner versus an audio or visual learner? Like, is that impacting how they end up feeling ready to go? Or are we like looking way too into it and athletes are just like, take a couple swings and they're like, all right, I'm ready. The one thing it is interesting. Like people will like take their pre-game throwing routine to church, and like they treat it like a religion, right? Like they have to do X, Y, and Z. Whereas hitting, I even saw it this past weekend or this past week. People take like a heavy bat, swing it a couple times, take a letter bat, kind of do a couple side bends, and they're like, okay, I'm ready to go in the cage. And I'm like, that's it.
Yeah.
That's it. And you know what? That is it for them. They do feel good with that.
No bands involved like with pitchers.
No heavy balls. No, yeah. So
no progression, no routine.
Right. But, someone else, like I said, you're going to see the differences with players, and it is interesting to observe what that intensity should feel like, because who knows, an athlete might feel like, I have to operate at 100%, but if you actually measured it, they might not actually be there. So again, that real versus feel is so important to discuss with them.
Oh man, baseball, softball, the lives we chose, right? Let's get to our listener question. We do have somebody who wrote in Jimbo Podcast 21@gmail.com. And once again, it pertains to hitting. And this comes to us from Nicholas. He writes, Jim, thank you for answering my question on this week's podcast. The hardest thing for me to teach mechanically as an instructor is teaching the rotational part of the swing in regards to the back foot. When a hitter who is heavy on their front side first feels how to turn/rotate, I usually see an ample amount of weight stuck, he has that in quotations, on their back foot, which obviously causes bat path issues. How would you guys, or you, Cass, not me, I'm not a coach, spoiler alert, how would Cassie teach rotation without the back foot just spinning or squishing the bug? Ugh, hate that, squishing the bug.
Sure. Yeah.
Hate that. That's from Nicholas. Thank you, Nick, by the way.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I could talk hitting all day, so I'll try not to make this too long of an answer. But if we get a really young athlete, you're teaching a motor learning skill, right? And then if you're getting an older athlete who, let's say, wasn't squishing the bug and then all of a sudden they are, now we're dealing with like probably some type of muscle imbalance or compensation, right? So you try to address why are they not utilizing their back hip in the first place. a simple test that I've done is I will put an athlete really, really narrow width. And I call it a restriction stance. So the picture like one of those large med balls that you see CrossFitters slamming or throwing, like that size, I'll probably put between their legs if they're uncomfortable feeling how wide their feet should be apart. So their med balls between their feet. They have no step. They have just the small coil of their upper back, and then they're supposed to go to the ball. And what you'll notice is they have to sequence correctly. Their back hip will have to go first. Now, what we want to try to reinforce with every hitter is that your foot is going to move, not because your big toe is pushing or your foot is plantar flexing like a sprint. Your foot moves as a byproduct of the power we get from our hip. So we're going to have that hip start to rotate, initiate the movement. It's important that we recognize it's the pelvis and not just the femur moving inside the hip. And so once that hip goes, everything else will follow suit. If the hitter is doing this drill and really rolling over, being top hand heavy, that's probably an indication they're out of sequence. Their upper body's going first. They're not getting their hip. So this is a perfect time to slow it down and say, okay, we're initiating with the hip. We're initiating with the hip. And once they start to feel comfortable with that, we'll get them a little bit wider. So now we open up their stance a little bit. Again, your back foot doesn't have to move. It's just coming from the hip. Let me see what we can produce from the hip, what we can produce from the hip. The final piece is if they can do these no problem, but then they get into their regular stride and they're starting to squish the bug, we understand that it's a weight shift issue now. It's not, oh, I don't understand how to use my hip first. It's that, well, I'm landing in my front side too hard, or I'm just not getting into the proper position when I do incorporate the stride. So a lot of step and pauses, a lot of stride and pause, get to that position, use the hip first. I'm a big proponent of hitting off of a slight wedge. So putting your foot on almost what looks like a calf stretcher, like it's a little downhill. Because
your front foot.
Back foot going downhill. Sorry. Back foot going downhill. And the reason I say that is because even if the hitter falls forward a little bit at first, that'll pull them out of squishing the bug. They'll feel that. You get them on flat ground and say, okay, let me see that same action now that we're not going downhill. So there's a lot of different hacks you can do to try to see what this feels like. The final piece to this, as an athlete gets older, you're going to look at their front hip internal rotation. So if you can test their front hip internal rotation, if they're really, really stuck and really, really tight, their body's not going to want to rotate into that front hip at all. And they'll like lean back and just rotate on their backside. Those are the hitters that will probably need to land with an open foot, maybe a little bit more of a wider stance. So again, anytime someone comes in, we're always testing external rotation or internal rotation just to see where their bias is. And then we can kind of coach them from there, because a lot of hitters have been told, hey, land with a closed front side. Your front side is really going to land where your front hip is going to allow you to rotate into. Not to get too technical, and it's difficult not to demo, but that would be the progression I would look at.
Well, no, this is great. We're going down the hitting rabbit hole today, which I really like and enjoy. Now, with the weight shift, and a lot of people, I think, get this wrong. They think that the weight shift means just shifting your weight from your back foot or your inside of your back foot to your front foot. And then once you're flexed on that front foot with that front knee, you push back, and that's where you get your power from. That's not weight shift.
Right.
Your weight shift is getting it off the back side. But it's not going from one side to the other and then back to the other again. That's not a weight shift. That's just going to cause your bat speed and your bat quickness. In my opinion, again, disclaimer, I'm not a coach, but in my opinion, for your bat speed and your bat quickness to slow down, especially against a high velocity softball or baseball. But with the weight shift, I think it is still vitally important if done the right way. And we see it with major league players. They do have a weight shift. They're not just strictly on that backside.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the technicality of it is that you're harnessing from your backside. The second your front heel lands with your front foot, it's trying to make sure you don't leak any energy or any momentum, right? So you harness all this energy momentum, you land on your front side, and that's where you want to see it come through hips, torso, shoulder, into your arms, into your hands, finally through the bat. That's like our velocity progression, our sequencing progression. Now, when someone has a bit of an injury, when someone comes out of their side bend, when someone has their hands come too early, we're leaking energy. So it doesn't matter how amazing our lower half might be, we have a break in the chain somewhere, right? So that is the other thing too. Or when someone like lands on their front foot and then leans backward, we're now losing all this energy that we just created. So yeah, it however someone wants to view it. But my favorite example was if you have a shopping cart that's going fast and you hit your front foot on a curb, it's gonna go up and over. So when you stop linear momentum, that's when you can start to create the rotational momentum. And so you have this linear momentum coming from your backside, your front heel lands. That's the shopping cart hitting the front, the wheels on the front side. And then it allows your body to really get into its true rotation stage.
What do you think about the scissors that is now being taught by some people?
I
Personally, I
actually
find it laughable, but
yeah, you know what? Okay, so
and by scissors, I'm sorry, by scissors, I just want to clear this up for the audience, meaning that if you're I'm lefty.
mm-hmm.
I always hold the pen in my left hand. Being a former left-handed hitter and left-handed thrower, I'm meaning front foot is right foot, back foot left foot, and by scissors, the back foot would slide
backwards, right towards first base. Yeah,
thank you.
So you would almost look like a Stanton at the end of your swing.
Yes,
super closed off.
Exactly.
Okay, so I like it for some hitters who are really, really stuck in internal rotation on their front hit. Not to the extreme, though. I'm talking about like 1 or 2 inches where they will end up with their swing and they'll be a little bit off kilter. That is usually a hitter either has to naturally have been doing that, because I think we can go back and watch video of baseball hitters for a long time, and there's a lot of hitters who have a little bit of a natural kickback, not to the extreme that we've been seeing, show up on social media. And hitters who cannot rotate into their front hip, this like allows them to cheat a little bit. And it has worked for some of our hitters. I don't think it necessarily needs to be taught to every hitter. And I also don't think it needs to be so reinforced to the extreme that it is being right now. It probably just needs to be something the coach is aware of. Like, okay, this hitter has a really limited front hip. They're not going to be able to really get to those positions. I mean, Miguel Cabrera has been doing some variation of this for a while, where he lands or he ends up a little close. Mike Trout ends up a little bit in a closed position. So it's not, I always like to try to see, okay, why are people teaching this in the first place, or why are people doing this in the first place? Because there has to be some value that comes from it. It can't be all ludicrous.
But it's not intentional, is what you're trying to say. A lot of it happens based off whether it be the ground force that you're generating, your hip rotation, something in the swing might be causing that scissors, like I think it is with a Stanton, rather than the move being done deliberately.
Correct. Yeah. Now, if someone has, the only way I could see myself like completely rewiring someone's swing over the age of 15 to this is if they had some type of injury where we're like, okay, this is not gonna like go away. Mm-hmm. We're still gonna have this like tightness, this discomfort, this healing, whatever happening at the front hip or the front side back, and maybe we want to intentionally try to rewire the swing a little bit. Sure. That would maybe be, just another tool in a coach's back pocket to utilize with the hitter. But yeah, I don't know if it necessarily needs to be so over exaggerated. There's a lot that goes on with hitters right now, and again, do you want to be viral or do you want to put out really high quality hitting content? And sometimes I think those get mixed, where it's like the more outrageous or the more extreme, the more views, right? So it's a hard balance sometimes, I think.
Well, where you can find that great content is at Coach_Cassie RB on Instagram and Coach Cassie RB on Twitter. And I'm at Jim Tara. Now, I don't put out much content. I put out like occasional lineups that I think should be in Major League Baseball for certain teams, as I did yesterday, Friday, as we record this on a Saturday. But you can still follow me on Twitter and Instagram too, if you want to put some boredom into your day. At Jim Tara. Nevertheless, though, I saw on your Instagram, thank you, Nick, by the way, for the question. We went into the hitting rabbit hole there. Do appreciate that. Email us, jimbopodcast21@gmail.com. I did see on your Instagram, I think yesterday, or maybe it was the day before, at Coach_Cassie RB, that you were, in a Red Sox uniform. You looked great. Red Sox uniform, looking like a major league coach at Dunkin' Donuts Park. And for those who don't know, that is in Hartford, Connecticut. Beautiful ballpark. You know, it's funny. I was thinking about this prepping for the show, and I was going to bring this up to you. These minor league parks across the country, compared to like Bull Durham, for example, are gorgeous. I remember when Troy Tulowitzki first came to the Blue Jays, Florida Exchange Stadium was the spring training home before it was renovated for Toronto. And Tulowitzki was asked, because he came from Colorado, he came from Arizona, and that's spring training out there. And he was asked, what do you think of Florida Exchange Stadium? By the way, I do hate calling ballpark stadiums. Baseball players don't play in stadiums. They play in ballparks. But Tulo was asked that question, and he said, I like it. It has like an old school feel to it. Ballparks now, the old school's gone. I mean, these ballparks are really just kind of cushy places for these minor leaguers to develop. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying that times have really changed. Money has been infused into this thing, I guess.
Yes.
But anyway, how was your experience?
It was awesome. I linked up with the Red Sox recruiter from there, Red Sox scout, from the area. He had come to our building to look at a couple of our pictures, and coincidentally had known me, known my Instagram account, and the Kelly Rodman Foundation is really what sponsors this event between the Yankees and Red Sox every year. And it's an awesome foundation. It's in honor of an awesome lady in baseball. And I think every year he really does try to get an honorary coach that's a female in our sport. So he asked if I wouldn't mind coming down, and he actually apologized. He goes, this is usually at Fenway, but Lady Gaga had a concert. We're going to be at Hartford, the home of the Yard Goats. And I, walking into that minor league stadium, I'm like, what are you apologizing for? This is incredible. Yeah. So on Wednesday, we actually got to be a part of a workout. And then on Thursday, I got to be in the dugout, got to coach first base, got to hang out. Really just how cool it was to talk to so many major league scouts who were at that game, and working with the athletes. Hey, what do you look for in a hitter? What do you look for in a player? And then, players like Matt Shaw, who is just the Cape Cod League MVP, a guy that you might see, playing in the bigs one day in a few years. Got to talk to him. Hey, what's your approach to the plate? How do you, So that was so neat to talk to these athletes, people who are basically on Major League Scouts' radar for next year's draft, and then be around these scouts and just people who love the game. So unreal opportunity. I'm super thankful for it. My 12-year-old self, I think, was really hurting because I grew up a diehard Yankees fan.
I was just going to say, you're a diehard Red Sox fan.
But you know what? Opportunity knocks, and baseball is baseball, and people are people, and that was such a cool opportunity.
Yeah, you learn working in the game and just working around the game as you do too, that your fandom kind of goes away. It's like working at Disney, and then you can't be a fan of Disney again because you've seen behind the curtain. It's over. It's done. Well, I'm glad you had a good experience there. And maybe one day you'll be like the director of player development for some team. Maybe. Going forward. I mean, who wouldn't hire a former or a current, never former, current national champion? I don't know. All right, episode 7 of Cross Functionality. Thank you everybody for subscribing, listening. Apple, Google, Spotify, Amazon Music, Softball Strength Academy to watch the show. We do greatly appreciate that. Thank you. Getting into our main topic today, episode 7, talking about the national championship. This is part 3, the third part of 7 parts. I think 7 parts, maybe 5 parts. I got to check again. I'm sorry. But today, talking part 3 about the SEC tournament, the Super Regionals, and the first part of the World Series. We're not going to talk about the game-clinching World Series victory. We'll talk about that in great detail next week. But talking about the SEC tournament, and brought up some stories from last week about, of course, losing to Fordham. And I guess you guys were questioning a little bit if the momentum was still there to succeed in the SEC tournament. But you guys ended up beating, that's right, can't read my own handwriting, Mississippi State, Georgia. I wrote George on my notes, by the way, instead of Georgia. Florida by a combined score of 16-3. It goes back to what we talked about last week, that while offensively you guys are very good and very powerful and very deep, your pitching, especially from Jackie, was tremendous. And that showed right there, 16, that you've outscored all those teams 16-3.
For sure. Funny enough, understandably so, Jackie's body started breaking down just a little bit at the end of the season, started getting some back spasms here and there. So we actually had 2 other pitchers that year. We had a sophomore who ended up tearing her ACL. So now we're down to 1. Mm-hmm. And then we had a senior who really had turned into a hitter, first baseman. She DH for us, Amanda Locke, tremendous hitter. But she had some pitching experience, and the pitcher that we had said, the unfortunate thing about the freshman who was on the team is she was so similar to Jackie with just a couple mile hours less. So people would, crank up the pitching machine getting ready to face Jackie. And if this other pitcher came in, it was almost a disservice because you really need to pair your softball pitchers to be very opposite of each other. They need to look very different. So this one girl, she hasn't pitched in about 2 years. She's super, super spinny thrower, just like spins it around, and he looks and he goes, right before the Florida championship game, he goes, Amanda, you want to pitch today? And she's like, all right, I guess I'm pitching today. So that last victory was with a girl that wasn't typically one of our pitchers. She was a senior. She pitched phenomenal game. And I think one of the, there's a couple cool things. Florida had really been a thorn in our side our entire career, and really had some bad losses, ugly losses to them. And so we faced Florida in the SEC championship, and we win, I believe it was 10-2, something along those lines. We really outscored them a lot. But we got done, and in the huddle afterwards, Murph looked around and goes, we're all under the understanding that should have been 14-1 because one of the runs we should have never given up, and we missed on 4 opportunities to score. And, I think from an outsider, they'd look and be like, you just won the SEC. Like, what? But we had it so ingrained in our head. We weren't trying to ever beat another team. We were trying to beat our best performance we ever had. And that wasn't our best performance we ever had. And that was where the criticism was. It wasn't, not that you didn't do a good job. It's just like, hey, if we're actually trying to peak, if we're trying to beat our best performance. And that's a very dangerous team to play against that plays a nameless, faceless opponent. When it's a team like Florida, which like really heightened rivalry, we didn't care. Mm-hmm. Were we beating our best game we ever played? Yes or no? On to the next one. And I think that was a huge factor to us being successful.
So for further context purposes, you guys made the postseason for the 14th straight year as a program. And it was your 8th time, we'll get to the World Series, but it was your 8th time going to the World Series. But we've talked about it on previous episodes that you guys felt you were in a different category within the SEC. You didn't really feel like you were quite there yet with the Floridas of the world or Georgia, whatever. So there had to still be that chip on your shoulder, and even your head coach, chip on the shoulders that, hey, we're good enough here. We should dominate this SEC tournament and go right into regional and super regionals.
Yeah, I think especially coming off winning the SEC regular season, you'll see a lot of times teams will like win the regular season. They have the target on their back, and there's one team that kind of peaks at the right time and wins the tournament. Again, a lot of times the selection committee, because selection Sunday is the Sunday after all the tournaments are done. They weigh heavily how a team does at the end. So coming off of losing to Florida, we didn't want to then have another loss within 2 or 3 games for a number of reasons, mainly because we all hated losing more than anything. But, we were hosting the tournament, and no SEC team that had ever hosted had won it. So we're like, screw it. Why don't let us be the first one? And I'm pretty sure it was right on Mother's Day that we ended up winning it. So that was it was extra sweet in so many ways. Beating Florida, doing it at home, being able to hug our moms as we posed for our pictures on top of the dugout. Like, what more could you ask for,
And moving on to regional and super regionals, you guys defeated Tennessee Tech, South Alabama, Michigan, and held those teams to just 7 runs over 5 games. Mind you, one of the teams that sticks out there, Michigan, they were ranked in the top 5 the entire season.
Mm-hmm. Great team. One of our biggest home field advantages at the end of May when playing in Alabama is that you get a team like Michigan, and you've experienced Northeast May. Mm-hmm. It's beautiful. It's like 75 degrees, no humidity. And you come to Alabama, and it is very difficult to play in that sun. It's very difficult to play in that humidity. And if you're not used to it, I mean, talk about our home field advantage. Like we had been used to that 90-something degree weather with 80-something% humidity at the same time. But they were a great team. They just hit us at our best. And I'm actually pretty sure we got ranked 2nd going into playoffs. We were the only team to play a conference champion every game of playoffs. Mm-hmm. I'm pretty sure it was, even going to the World Series, I think every team we had to beat was a conference champion. And looking back afterwards, I was like, yeah, no one could say we didn't earn that. We hit, because you're playing against teams that are hot, that are playing well at the right time.
Mind you, USA Softball had your team ranked first just once out of the 14-week season, which is pretty incredible when you look back on it. You guys are certainly ranked in the top 5, but
Mm-hmm.
you were only ranked number 1 once.
Mm-hmm.
Hard to explain that.
I don't, I think we liked it. Rankings are what they are. But again, no, like, it's just always like little facts that come back to you even 10, 11 years later. I don't think a team that had been ranked 1 had won the national championship in a while. It was almost like if you get put on Madden's cover curse, like you didn't want to be ranked 1 type thing. So we got the second ranking. We're like, okay, that's what we wanted. You fly maybe a little bit under the radar. Like you're a favorite, but you're not the favorite. It was fine. Like I said, we were playing nameless, faceless opponents the entire time. We were trying to beat our best game we ever played, and it didn't matter if we were 1 or 10. It was what it was.
I love your body language when I feel like you're on the couch of a psychology session where you lean back a little bit and you're starting to tell stories. It's really great, and I think people should visually, if they're listening, watch this show, Softball Strength Academy. When we're talking hitting, our body language, your body language, it's down to business. But when we're telling stories, it's more relaxed. It's great. Everybody should watch again, Softball Strength Academy. I do. How did you? I want to touch on this personally. How did you feel? Going into, because you mentioned last week you felt as good as you've ever felt going into the postseason. How did you feel mentally hitting? How did you feel physically? Because not to take away from your defense, you were a great defender, but hitting was your bread and butter. I think you'd collaborate on that opinion. How did you feel both physically and mentally going into the postseason on the offensive side?
Yeah, you know what? I wasn't nervous at the plate, and usually playoffs came with like a little added nerves. And so I think that's that veteran feel where it's like, okay, this is just like every other game. And if you got out, it wasn't too big of a deal. And to be honest, I really wasn't seeing the ball well, but I was finding ways to still get some hits here and there. And I was still finding ways to be productive. And I had gotten hurt actually in the SEC tournament at a play at first base. A girl slid into my arm and I landed on my arm. So for the rest of the playoffs, I couldn't finish my swing. And so I think whether that affected my swing or not, it was definitely in the back of my head that I was like, okay, is this going to affect it? Is this going to affect it? So it was what it was. I think the other thing of it too is you have so many people above and below you in the lineup. You have so many people who are supporting you. There was never this pressure where it's like, okay, I'm the only hitter that can get the job done. Obviously I wanted to get the job done, but there was never that pressure on that team. We all shared so much of the load of production. That, it made it fun to be a part of that lineup, obviously, but even when you didn't feel like you had to be at your best all the time, as far as seeing the ball this big and having your best at bats ever. It was, okay, I'm not seeing the ball. I can poke a single right here. I can still get the job done and not feel like I had to hit a home run,
Yeah. And you were still batting in the number 2 spot at that time.
I don't remember actually. I cycled 2 to 6, I think, that whole year.
How did not being able to finish your swing affect you, if at all?
I'm not sure. I think it was one of those things where you'd be at a bat, you take a swing, and then I wouldn't feel it till I was running down the first base line where I was like, oh. So it was really more in my preparation where I had this like really great drill series set up that I was preparing before practices and games. That completely changed. And to be honest, leading into the World Series, I only trained top hand. And then all of a sudden I got into the World Series. I had one of my biggest hits in the first game of the World Series. And I was like, that's it. That works. I'm going to continue training top hand.
How did you feel going into the World Series as a team? Because you guys kind of were at this point, we're on a roll. Was the confidence peaking? Did you look across from you and realize who you were playing and how you had to play your best game? What was your mindset going into that World Series and in the beginning of the World Series?
It's one of those things where it's almost hard not to get flashbacks from what happened the year before. So like, we got run rolled by Florida in a doubleheader the year before to get kicked out. Freshman year, we lose on a walk-off grand slam. Like we had all these, we didn't have the best endings at the World Series, and yet we felt like we were close, but maybe we weren't as close as we thought. And it was actually Olivia Gibson, who was a senior. We had 6 seniors that year. She was the only one that didn't play. And what's crazy is you talk in post-game interviews and people are like, well, why'd you guys win it this year and not other years? And her name gets brought up more times than not. But I remember we're standing there and she's like, I was asking her how she's feeling. She's like, I feel like we're here to pick up what is rightfully ours, like what we've paid for. And she referenced that story of like, winning a national championship is expensive and you can't pay for it all at once. She's like, we've already paid for it. We've paid for it so many times over. She goes, that's already ours. We're just here to pick it up. And it was this very calming, odd sense of like, not invincibility, but almost like not this false sense of invincibility, but just like, okay, you're right. Like, here we go. And when you can eradicate doubt like that, it's a lot of fun.
It's a lot of confidence.
It's
a good way to look at things.
It was probably the most confident I think most confident team I've ever been a part of. So much so that like we were not the favorite in some games, but we were like, we weren't mad by it. We were like confused. We're like, what are they seeing that we don't? Like we couldn't not see that we were the best team in the country, which is how it's supposed to be. 5 months later, I would go back and I was like, oh my gosh, they're shortstop. They're this, like they had better this. But like at the time, I don't know. You're just so blinded by it.
And I mean, you had to have that mindset going into that series against Oklahoma. Final few games.
Yes. And we really, again, thank goodness, like social media is not what it was right now, but you hear little murmurings, little this, you hear in an interview, like who they picked to win it. Not a single reporter picked us to win it. And again, we weren't mad or distracted by it. We were just confused. I was genuinely confused how they thought Oklahoma was the better team. Again, I go back and watch videos and I'm like, holy cow, like they were stacked. Mm-hmm. But we just saw each other in such a light. It was talk about like a different shade of glasses you see your team through. But yeah, I pictured us as giants and everyone else was kind of just along for the ride. We were just gonna walk through everything.
Yeah, that's where, and you know what, that's where the data, I think, and the analytics still have not been able to figure out that gray area. Baseball and softball, there is a gray area, black and white certainly. And there's a lot of value to data and analytics, but there's also that gray area too. And admittedly so, you just said it, Oklahoma was the better team, and you guys still ended up pulling out the victory. So I don't know, maybe I'm crazy, but I think there's that gray area there.
There has to be, right? Like, why would you actually play the game? If you're right, if you're only going to look at this team should beat this team, then there is obviously something in the game that matters. There's obviously something about adrenaline and passion and that momentum that matters, and scraping and clawing. And because even though like it is a team sport, it's a very spotlight sport. So hitter versus pitcher, like you can get these individual moments, one-on-one moments in a game. But I mean, talk about how good it feels like to be in a one-on-one moment and have 19 people in the dugout, like locked in with you on every pitch. Yeah. It's empowering.
Well, hey, what was the media like? Did you have to do television pre-game production meetings? Did you have to talk to more reporters? What were some of the media extracurricular activities that you and your teammates had to fulfill? What were those obligations like?
So there's always a media day at the World Series. I don't know if they still have it. I'm sure they do. But where they'll, everyone gets dressed up in their uniform. You go to the field. You do like a lot of the B-roll stuff that you see at the World Series. So that's always a fun day because the reporters genuinely want to get to know the players, the teams, to get to know like their emotions of it, something to comment on during the game. So that's always a fun day. Before the game, we really didn't have any media obligations. Maybe Holly Rowe, who covers a ton of professional and collegiate sports.
Legend, yeah. And I remember Beth Moens was on the call doing the play-by-play. Another glass ceiling breaker. Yeah, iconic, yeah. And that's, I mean, it's cool though, looking back at it for you probably, and seeing her now do some NFL games, college games, and saying she called my national championship. She was the voice. Sure. And then you look at Holly Rowe, who just, I think recovered from cancer recently and is a legend in her own right as a reporter. I mean, it's got to be pretty cool. And I'm wondering if maybe it's a little bit at times, or could have been, overwhelming.
My freshman year, yes, I remember being like, those are them on TV. And then all of a sudden you do enough games with Holly there, enough games on ESPN, enough games where it's like, okay, that's in one box and I'm focused on the game. But yeah, like just having conversations with her after the game was always a press conference. And they would select a few athletes to come talk in the press conference. And I remember we lose the first game to Oklahoma. I don't know if we're getting there on this podcast, but after we lost, Murph looks at me and goes, "You're going to the media today." And I was like, all right, yeah, I'll field the hard questions. Come on.
Okay. So, you probably should also be a broadcaster too, because you're very good speaker and very good at doing this. But what was that like for you? Was it post game press conference? Who did you have to talk to in
Sure.
general?
So it's a room. They have a room set up. They have the
Mm-hmm.
NCAA backdrop with the World Series logo.
Mm-hmm.
The table set up. Your name cards right there with a glass of water. The microphone. It looks like what you watch on TV. And then there's a room of folding chairs, and there's people from Alabama, Birmingham news. Then the opposing team, so like Oklahoma's news is there. People covering the World Series is there. A couple of ESPN people are there. And they're just asking questions. There's a mediator who picks who's allowed to ask the question and whatnot. But talk about being like, I mean, we lose that first game. Of course, you're fired up. You want to win the first game of the finals, and so you lose, and you're like, you're mad. You go through all the stages of it, right? You get mad, you get pissed, but then you're determined. You want to just start focusing on the next game, and you got to sit there and be like, so. How did it feel when Oklahoma pulled off the suicide squeeze in the fourth inning? And what you want to say is it felt terrible, but you have to have this very like well put together.
How do you think it felt?
I wanted to be like, how would you feel?
Yeah. But see, the job of the sports information director or somebody on the PR side, the SID, their job really is to prep you for this. Did you get prepped at all, or was it just kind of like, all right?
His name was Skip Powers, and he's a legend in our program because he was awesome. And talk about a guy who was bought in through and through. And he had been there all 4 years, which I think is probably more and more uncommon for a collegiate level. At softball, someone gets the job, they move on to try to get bigger and better things. But he was there for all 4 years, and we get prepped at the beginning of every season how to handle interviews, even something as simple as when your person next to you is talking, what you should look like. Because if you're in the background not paying attention, it looks bad, and how much your body language is going to matter way more than what you actually say. So he just gave us a heads up. He's like, listen, these are probably what they're going to talk about. These are the moments in the game they're probably going to bring up. And then that was that,
So what people don't know also may or may not know, and that's okay, is that when, like, say, Nick Saban, for example, when he's getting interviewed, I don't know, at halftime in game, I don't know, throw out a reporter, I don't care who, Johnny Johnson. When he's getting interviewed by Johnny there, the SID, they have to go through the SID first, and the SID is right, just not in the camera shot, but he's right there next to Saban. That's what a lot of people don't know. And it's not easy going. I mean, you can do as much media prep and media training as you want. And Saban's been doing it for a long time, but student athletes, it's not always easy after a win, after a loss, going right into that room and having to field these questions and answer these questions in a very articulate way. Speaking of which, I can't talk.
No, it's all good. I agree. After a loss, I think you almost have to put your athlete self to the side and say, okay, I'm representing the University of Alabama right now. I'm representing something way bigger than myself. Put your own pity party to the side. And this is like, they're doing their job. This isn't, there's always a respectful nature about it. You shake their hand when they're done, and then you can move on to what you need to do. But it's a part of it, and it's not a burden. It is an immense privilege to be a part of that team, to play at the World Series, to have people want to ask you questions. Like, that's not a burden. So how many people get to say that, So,
what other questions did you get besides the squeeze bunt?
I'm trying to remember. Oh, maybe just like how our team was feeling about going into it, which is hard because, I got maybe 10 minutes with the team. But it was neat because we had never lost to a team twice that entire season. If someone had beat us once, the very next game was our best game that we had ever played. So I had just brought that up. I said, if anything, this put us in hopefully an opportunity to play our best game we've ever played. But it was only a couple of questions. Jackie, certainly our pitcher, got asked questions about how she was feeling, if the fatigue was wearing in, just things like that, and just being really lighthearted about it. And it was just nice and easy, nothing too crazy.
Do you remember any particular media member or publication that sticks out that was asking you questions in that press conference?
Graham Hayes used to work for ESPN, and he, I think, is still one of the best writers for the game of softball. And I just appreciated so much how he saw the game. He loved to tell the story of softball, and like you could tell through his writing and through his like just how he approached it. He was so in love with softball, and he just wanted other people to love it too. And so I appreciated Graham.
Okay. So you can't remember like Associated Press, USA Today.
I don't remember.
You don't remember.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
That's okay. This is why we're going through this exercise, though. I'm trying to take everybody through what it takes to win a national championship, and the outside. I certainly don't want to call them distractions, but the outside activities that players have to go through during this experience. It's not just, hey, let's go to the field, warm up, play, and go home. There's a lot more to it. There's also, by the way, sleeping in a bed that you're not used to in hotels and having to still eat properly. There's a lot that goes into this type of experience.
I was just going to say the food is the hardest part, I think, because we got done with that game at like 11:45 at night. There's not a lot that's open. So now that's on our director of operations to scramble to try to figure out where am I going to get food for 33 people?
Right.
And then even leading up to a 8:00 at night game, you're nervous, but you still need to eat your meals. When do you eat dinner? When do you it's like, I think eating was so like not knowing when to do it and like having to force feed yourself a granola bar or something to put in you because you are nervous. You don't feel like putting food in your stomach when you're, that excited to play, but you need to. Yeah, that was challenging. And then I'll tell you what, we didn't have to worry about school. The Pac-12 and any, there's certain Ivies like Northwestern, I think is on a trimester schedule. They would go back to the hotel and need to go take a test or wake up early the next morning and get proctored for like their finals. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, thank goodness that we didn't have to worry about school. We were done. Our school schedule was done. Like, how is that fair that certain teams are having to still take finals? So, well, we had been done for a month.
Mind you, there's some professors too that don't care that you play a sport.
Nope.
And their class is their entire world.
Yep.
And if you miss or you're not getting a late pass or whatever you want to call it. That's incredible. That's a great point. That's something also people don't think about. Another added distraction. You guys didn't have to do when this was around beginning of June.
Yep.
Of 2012, right?
And our finals week was end of April.
Wow.
Yeah. So talk about
really.
Yeah. We always said May was when we got to experience what it was like to be a professional athlete.
Sure.
You get to play with no schoolwork. But I'll tell you what, some really, really cool experiences is signing autographs after the game. And we can even try to find pictures of that. But I mean, hundreds of little girls who like just think you're the best thing ever because you're wearing a uniform on that field, or people like reaching over the railing just to try to get a high five, like things like that it seems like it's only reserved for professional athletes. You get 17, 18, 19, 20-year-old females experiencing that, that's very cool.
And you'll always remember that. You'll never forget.
Yeah, for sure.
What was the clubhouse setup like in the World Series?
So funny enough, this was a big like debate of NCAA, like Omaha versus we didn't have a clubhouse. They were trailers. So it was like you went to your bus, you were already changed from the hotel, and then there was like little trailers they had set up in the back. So it was kind of just a room that you sat in, and that was it. And then you'd walk down to the dugout. I think now there's a lot of money that's been infused into it that's going to support bathrooms, clubhouses, stuff like that. Because I do think it's a special experience, and it's such a great stadium or such a great field area to play at. It just, softball wasn't what it was now, and it happened fast. And I think, Omaha's obviously had a stadium that gets used for other things and has a different feel and different setup.
Well, looking at it from just the positive side of things, you have to think that you guys, your team, was one of those teams. You're one of those girls that helped pave the way for what these players have now with clubhouses, with bathrooms, with
I hope
food.
so.
You would think that, and all the money being infused now, you would think you were part of paving the way, because Alabama is a big-time name. They're right up there. Their athletic programs are right up there with most household names in all of sports, professional or college. I don't care if it's the New York Yankees, the Boston Red Sox, the New England Patriots. When you think of those teams, you think of the University of Alabama, and you think of their programs by extension. So I would think you guys helped pave the way for what softball is now.
Yeah, I really do hope so, and I have a lot of pride thinking that is the case, and I hope it is.
Yeah. So you guys, so really, that's amazing. You had to get changed at the hotel. I'm
Oh yeah.
amazed by that. I think you'd be able to get changed at the field.
Nope.
Did you get any food?
Our director of
Catering?
operations would have, like, she would go out and get food for us. Yeah, I mean, but it wasn't like it was provided.
So there's no clubhouse attendant, obviously. None of that. Wow.
I now might be different, but yeah, this was I think, you saw it on social media, the debate between like the NCAA funding and male versus female, which is, I get it, like some male sports will earn more revenue, but the NCAA funding is what was supposed to be equal, right? That was supposed to be the Title IX aspect. Anyway, it's cool to see that our female sports are getting attention. It's cool to see that softball is getting attention, and that experience is just getting better and better. Now, I want to make it very clear. At the time, we weren't like, oh, we have to get changed at the hotel. Like,
Right,
we didn't
right.
think of any of that. It's really just in recent light that, that I think a lot of that has been brought up.
So, wow. I can't. I just in the World Series. I can't get over the fact that you guys just had to get changed at the hotel.
Yeah.
Amazing. Wow, incredible. But you know what? You still got to experience everything. So let me
100%.
get this straight. They make you talk to the media after a loss, but they can't provide you with certain amenities.
Yes, no showers, no.
Shame on the NCAA.
No, it's
We
fine.
won't get into that now, but wow. Incredible. Well, great show this week, episode 7,
Yeah.
the national championship, part 3. Next week, part 4, episode 8, talking about winning it all, that final game against the Oklahoma Sooners. And of course, the rain delay, and you guys doing that dance, that special dance that you got, or the chant with the dance, right? I want to get it.
Yeah, it was more just us being obnoxious that we were mad about a rain delay. So we decided to stand out in the rain and be like, oh, yeah, it's not raining that hard.
We're going to talk about that next week. And of course, that comeback that you guys had too.
Yeah.
I mean, it reminds you a little bit of, we'll talk about it next week, but it reminds you a little bit of that rain delay in Game 7 of the 2016 World Series in Cleveland.
Mm-hmm.
The Cubs came back on the Indians, now Guardians, after that rain delay.
Yeah.
I want to get some inside stories inside of what was being said in the dugout, in the trailer, if that was the case. We'll talk all about that final game and just getting your thoughts and kind of reminiscing on winning it all. That is next week, episode 8. I'm really looking forward to that.
Awesome. Thank you, Jim. And thank you, everyone, for listening. I appreciate it.
What do you have coming up at Softball Strength Academy, if anything at all? I'm sure there's a lot going on.
Yeah, we're be on the lookout for this fall some cool courses and different drill series and drill libraries that we're putting out. But for the time being, it's a lot of content that we have planned and ready to post. So that's at Softball Strength Academy on Instagram, and then a lot of similar posts you'll see on Twitter at Coach_Cassie RB. Nope, sorry, Coach Cassie RB on Twitter. I'll have to look into that. Jim knows better than I do. Jim knows better than I do.
I have it right here on Twitter, Coach Cassie RB, and
there you go.
Instagram, Coach_Cassie RB.
I had it right the first time, Jim.
Don't forget the Lab Epstein Hitting Podcast. Check that out for me. Do me a favor. Video, audio, I don't care. Apple, Google, Spotify. We're on a million different platforms. We're talking about gaining the mental edge in the box this week as Ep was in the mountains enjoying his end of the summer.
Very nice. Awesome. Thank you, Jim.
Be sure to subscribe to that. Thank you, everybody, for listening, watching, and we will talk to you episode 8 next week.